The stone, smooth and cool from the riverbed, felt like an extension of Isabeau's own will. Could a single well-slung missile truly alter a fate? Her own, perhaps not. It was already too deeply etched with shadow and flight. But the fate of others? That was a question the wind whistling through the high passes of the Alpujarras seemed to whisper back at her, unanswered. She loosed the sling. The stone blurred, a dark streak against the bruised twilight sky, and a plump rabbit, startled from its graze, tumbled lifelessly onto the scree. Another meal, another day survived. Isabeau, barely into her 20s, moved with the lean grace of a creature born to the wild. Her dark hair, the colour of storm clouds, was usually braided tightly, a stark contrast to the pallor of her skin, a legacy of her northern Basque origins that marked her as an outsider in these sun-drenched Andalusian mountains. Her eyes, though, were the true testament to her journey, sharp, observant, missing nothing, and holding a depth of sorrow that belied her years. They had seen her village burn, consumed by the fires of a conflict she barely understood, but whose brutality was seared into her memory. Now she sought only anonymity, a quiet passage through a world that had offered her little kindness. Below her perch, nestled in a fold of the mountains like a secret clutched to the earth's breast, lay the hamlet of Almendro Escondido. Its name, the hidden almond tree, was apt. A scattering of whitewashed houses, clinging to ancient terraces, it was home to a community of Mozarabs, Christians who had lived for centuries under Moorish rule, and a few Mudejar families who had chosen to remain after the fall of Granada, their lives now precarious under the new Christian kings. They were poor, their existence eked out from the stubborn soil, but there was a quiet resilience about them, a fragile peace Isabeau observed from afar, never daring to approach. Their elder, a man named Matteo, with a face like a weathered olive trunk and eyes that held the patient wisdom of the mountains themselves, seemed to be the village's gentle anchor. The peace was a fragile thing, easily shattered. Today it fractured under the hooves of shod horses and the grating voices of soldiers. Capitan Rodrigo Vargas, the new Christian commander of the region, had sent his enforcers. Leading them was Corporal Gomez, a man whose brutish face and swaggering gait seemed designed to inspire fear. His armor creaked as he dismounted, his gaze sweeping over the assembled villagers with open contempt. By order of Capitan Vargas, loyal servant of their majesties Ferdinand and Isabella. Gomez's voice boomed, scattering a flock of chickens. A tribute is due. Food for the garrison, silver for the crown's coffers, and 10 of your strongest young men for labour in Montefrio. A collective gasp, a rustle of fear went through the small crowd. Matteo stepped forward, his slight frame unbowed. "Corporal," he began, his voice calm but strained, "we are a poor village. We have little silver. Our young men are needed for the harvest, meagre as it is. We offer what hospitality we can." Gomez laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Hospitality? We are not guests, old man. We are the authority." He backhanded Matteo across the face. The elder stumbled, a thin trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. The villagers cried out, a sound of helpless anguish. Isabeau, hidden amongst the rocks above, felt a familiar cold fury rise within her, a ghost of the inferno that had consumed her past. Her hand, unbidden, went to the leather pouch at her belt, her fingers closing around another perfectly weighted stone.
No.
Stay hidden. That was the litany she had lived by. But the sight of Matteo, so dignified in his suffering, the raw terror on the faces of the women and children, it was a spark to tinder. The flames she had tried to douse for so long roared back to life. Before conscious thought could intervene, her sling was a blur. The stone struck Gomez's sword hand with a sickening thud. The corporal roared in pain, his weapon clattering to the dusty ground. Another stone, and a second soldier, reaching for his own blade, yelped as his helmet was knocked askew, stunning him. Chaos erupted. "Hechicera, witch!" someone screamed. Isabeau's voice, rough from disuse but carrying clearly in the sudden silence, cut through the air, her Spanish accented but unmistakable. "Leave them, or the mountains themselves will answer for their pain." Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone, melting back into the jumbled rocks and thorny scrub, leaving behind a stunned tableau of enraged soldiers and bewildered, terrified villagers. The people of Almendro Escondido found her an hour later, huddled in a shallow cave, shivering despite the mild air. Matteo, his face bruised but his eyes alight with a strange mixture of fear and gratitude, led the small delegation. Beside him stood a young woman, Catalina, her dark eyes blazing with a fierce, untamed spirit. "Señorita," Matteo began, his voice raspy, we do not know how to thank you, or what to make of your skill." Isabeau looked away. "I did what I had to. Now they will be angrier. You should move, hide." "And you?" Catalina challenged, her chin high. "Will you vanish like a mountain spirit?" Isabeau's gaze flickered towards the girl. There was an echo of her own lost defiance in Catalina's eyes. "I always vanish." "Not this time," Matteo said quietly. "They saw you, they will hunt you, and they will punish us for your intervention. Our only hope is to face this together. Guide us, Serana. You know these mountains better than any." Mountain Woman. The name settled on her, heavy as a shroud, yet also strangely like a mantle. She was torn. The instinct to flee, to preserve her own precarious existence, warred with the image of Matteo's bloodied face, the memory of her own burning home. These people were defenseless. And she, for reasons she couldn't articulate, had tied her fate to theirs with 2 well-aimed stones. "There is a place," she said at last, her voice barely a whisper, "deeper in the Sierras, hard to find, harder to reach, but defensible." A collective sigh of relief, fragile as spun glass, went through the small group. Isabeau felt the weight of their hope settle upon her, an unfamiliar burden. She had run from connection all her life. Now it seemed it had hunted her down in the guise of a desperate village. The journey to the new refuge, a cluster of abandoned shepherds' huts clinging to a precipitous ravine, was arduous. Isabeau moved with tireless efficiency, guiding them through treacherous goat paths, finding hidden springs, her knowledge of the terrain absolute. She began, reluctantly at first, to teach. To Catalina and a few of the more agile youths, she demonstrated how to move silently, how to read the signs of the land, how to use the contours of the earth for cover. She showed them which plants could soothe fevers, which berries were safe. Her sling remained her own secret, a skill too potent, too dangerous to share lightly. Catalina was an eager student, her initial brashness tempered by a dawning respect for Isabeau's quiet competence. "Where did you learn all this, Isabeau?" she asked one evening, as they watched the stars prick the velvet Andalusian sky. A shadow crossed Isabeau's face. "Necessity," she said curtly, and Catalina learned not to pry into the silences that clung to their protector like the mountain mist. Matteo, meanwhile, became Isabeau's confidant of sorts. He shared stories of the region, of its mingled Christian, Muslim and Jewish past, of the delicate balance shattered by the Reconquista. He never questioned her past, but his gentle wisdom offered a quiet counterpoint to the harshness of her experiences. "Courage is not the absence of fear, child," he told her once, seeing the haunted look in her eyes. "It is acting in spite of it." News of the defiance at Almendro Escondido reached Capitan Rodrigo Vargas in his garrison at Montefrio, a repurposed Moorish alcazaba that now brooded over the town, a symbol of the new order. Vargas, a career soldier in his late 30s, ambitious and believing firmly in order imposed by strength, was enraged. He saw the region as his to command, its people resources to be managed. This act of rebellion, led by some phantom woman, was an affront to his authority. "Find this! Serana Phantasma!" he roared at Corporal Gomez, whose hand was still bandaged. "Offer a reward. I want her head, and I want the village that sheltered her razed to the ground as an example." Patrols fanned out through the Alpujarras, a net tightening around the hidden communities. Isabeau knew they couldn't hide forever. The small store of food they had brought was dwindling. With a heavy heart, she began her own kind of foraging. Her raids were swift, precise, and targeted. She learned the patrol routes, the timing of supply wagons heading to the smaller outposts. Under the cloak of darkness, she would strike, her sling a silent whisper of devastation. Stones would shatter lantern glass, take down sentries with blows to the head or knees, create confusion. She and a hand-picked few, including an increasingly capable Catalina, would then seize what they needed: sacks of grain, salted meat, a cask of wine that could be traded for medicine, tools. Always, she emphasized, they took only what was essential. No unnecessary bloodshed, no looting for personal gain. Her legend grew. To the soldiers, she was a demon, a phantom who struck from nowhere and vanished. To the scattered, oppressed hamlets of the Alpugarras, whispers of La Serrana Phantasma became a fragile beacon of hope. Some even left small offerings of food or water at known mountain shrines, hoping for her protection. The success, however, came at a cost. Vargas, infuriated by his inability to catch the elusive ghost, intensified his brutality. Villages suspected of aiding her faced harsh reprisals, homes burned, livestock confiscated, men taken for questioning who never returned. Isabeau saw the smoke on the horizon, heard the tales of suffering, and the weight of her responsibility grew heavier. "We are drawing his fire upon others," she confided in Mateo one night, her voice raw with guilt. The scent of wild thyme, usually a comfort, now seemed cloying. Perhaps it would be better if I left, drew him away from you all." Mateo placed a frail hand on her arm. His touch was surprisingly strong. "And where would these people find hope then, Isabeau? You have shown them that resistance is possible, that courage can bloom even in the stoniest soil. To leave now would be to extinguish that flame. The suffering under Vargas was there before you. You have merely given it a name, a focus for its rage. But you have also given us a shield, however small." His words, meant to comfort, only tightened the knot of conflict within her. She was a survivor, not a savior, a protector, perhaps, but at what cost to those she protected? The nightmares of her burning village returned with renewed intensity, now mingled with the faces of the Andalusian villagers she had come to know. Capitan Vargas was not a fool. His initial rage had cooled into a more calculating ruthlessness. His lieutenant, a sharp-eyed sergeant named Torres, had been gathering intelligence. Whispers from informants, a captured shepherd from a distant valley tortured into talking. Slowly, a picture emerged. La Serrana Phantasma was not a supernatural entity, but a woman, likely Basque from her accent, with an uncanny skill with a sling, and she was fiercely protective of the small community she had taken under her wing, particularly, it seemed, a spirited young woman named Catalina. The trap was set with cold precision. Catalina, emboldened by their recent successes, and perhaps a touch of youthful recklessness Isabeau had warned against, had ventured too close to a deserted watchtower on a scouting mission. It was an ambush. She fought fiercely, her dagger, a gift from Isabeau, tasting blood, but she was overwhelmed. News reached Isabeau like a physical blow. Catalina was captured, taken to the garrison in Montefrio. Vargas had sent a message, delivered by a terrified goatherd. "The girl will be made an example in the town square during the feast of San Miguel, unless the Phantasma wishes to witness it." The air in the hidden ravine grew thick with despair. Catalina, with her fire and hope, was beloved. Isabeau felt a cold, hollow ache replace the familiar knot of anxiety. This was her fault. Her protection had become a lure. "We must do something," one of the young men cried, his voice cracking. "An assault on Montefrio? It's suicide," another countered, his face pale. Isabeau remained silent, her gaze fixed on the distant, brooding silhouette of Montefrio's Alcazaba. The scent of wood smoke from their meagre fire was acrid in her nostrils. Her mind raced, discarding one desperate plan after another. A frontal attack was impossible. Negotiation? Vargas would laugh. He wanted her, or he wanted to break the spirit of the mountains. Mateo watched her, his ancient eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored her own. "What is in your heart, child?" Isabeau finally looked at him. "He wants a spectacle," she said, her voice flat. "He wants to break her, and through her all of you," and he wore hands clenched. The familiar urge to flee, to save herself, was a distant, dying ember. What had replaced it was a cold, hard resolve. He will not have her. The Feast of San Miguel, a day of celebration, of crowds, of distraction. A plan, audacious and fraught with peril, began to form in her mind. It was a wild gamble, relying on precision, timing, and the courage of the few she had trained. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice low and urgent, drawing the small group of villagers closer. "This is what we will do." The market square of Montefrio buzzed with an uneasy energy on the Feast of San Miguel. Flags drooped listlessly in the late summer heat. The usual festive atmosphere was dampened by the increased presence of Vargas's soldiers, their polished helmets glinting menacingly. In the center of the square, a crudely erected wooden platform stood as a grim promise. Catalina was to be brought out at noon. Isabeau, her face smudged with dirt, her hair hidden beneath a peasant's scarf, moved through the throng, every sense alive. She had traded her usual practical attire for the drab clothes of a local woman, blending into the periphery. With her were two of the swiftest young men from Almendro Escondido, their faces tight with fear, but also a desperate bravery. Their role was critical: diversion. As the church bells began to toll the noon hour, Isabeau gave a subtle nod. On the far side of the square, near the garrison's stables, a sudden commotion erupted. Shouts, the whinnying of horses. One of the young men, feigning drunkenness, had accidentally knocked over a brazier, and dry straw had caught fire. The other feigned a loud, escalating argument with a merchant. Soldiers, drawn by the twin disturbances, began to move towards the chaos. This was Isabeau's moment. Slipping through a narrow alleyway she had scouted days before, she approached the rear of the garrison. The festival and the staged diversions had thinned the guards here more than she dared hope. 2 sentries stood before a small postern gate. Her sling was a whisper. 2 stones, delivered with blinding speed, struck their helmets with concussive force. They crumpled without a sound. Inside, the garrison was a maze of courtyards and stone passages. Isabeau moved like a wraith, her knowledge gleaned from Matteo's descriptions and her own daring nighttime reconnaissance. She found Catalina in a small, windowless cell, her spirit bruised but not broken. "Isabeau!" Catalina's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and fierce joy. "Quiet. We don't have much time." Isabeau worked quickly at the cell door's crude lock with a piece of sharpened metal. The lock gave. As they slipped out, a figure blocked their path. Capitan Rodrigo Vargas. He stood, sword drawn, a grim smile on his lips. "La Serrana Fantasma. I knew you wouldn't disappoint." "Let her go, Vargas," Isabeau said, her voice steady, positioning herself between the Capitan and Catalina. Her daggers were in her hands, glinting faintly. "After all the trouble you've caused?" "I think not." Vargas lunged. The fight was a desperate dance in the confined space. Vargas was strong, his military training evident in his powerful sword strokes. But Isabeau was a whirlwind of motion, her smaller size and agility her advantage. Her daggers darted in and out, seeking openings in his armor, deflecting his blade. Her sling, still loaded, was a threat he couldn't ignore, forcing him to divide his attention. She used the environment. A loose barrel kicked into his path, a hanging lantern brought crashing down with a well-aimed stone from her free hand, plunging a section of the corridor into momentary darkness. In that instant of confusion she feinted with a dagger, then drove her shoulder hard into his side, where his armor was thinnest. He grunted, stumbling. "Now, Catalina, run!" Catalina, who had watched in terrified awe, didn't hesitate. She fled towards the predetermined escape route. Vargas roared, recovering, and charged Isabeau again, his pride wounded. But Isabeau wasn't aiming for a kill, only escape. She parried his next blow, the force jarring her arm, and then, with a final desperate burst of speed, she disengaged, spinning away and following Catalina. Behind them, Vargas's shouts of fury and the belated sounds of alarm echoed through the garrison. They plunged back into the chaos of the festival square, now thick with smoke from the stable fire and the milling, confused crowds. The diversion team had done its work well. Isabeau, grabbing Catalina's hand, half-dragged her through the melee towards the town's western gate, which was less heavily guarded. A thrown stone from Isabeau's sling shattered the oil lamp by the gatehouse, giving them precious seconds of darkness. They slipped through, vanishing into the rugged embrace of the Alpujarras just as the full garrison alarm was raised. Isabeau felt a searing pain in her left arm. Vargas's blade had grazed her after all. But they were out. Back in the hidden ravine of Almendro Escondido, the air was thick with the scent of crushed herbs as Matteo tended to Isabeau's wounded arm. The gash was deep, but clean. Catalina sat beside her, her earlier bravado replaced by a quiet, profound gratitude, her hand resting lightly on Isabeau's uninjured one. The community, though shaken by the ordeal, was exultant. Their Catalina was safe. Their Serrana had faced the lion in his den and emerged. The victory was costly, Isabeau knew. Her arm would take time to heal. Their refuge, though still secret, felt less secure. Yet something had shifted. News trickled in over the following weeks. Capitan Vargas had been publicly humiliated. The escape of a lone woman and a girl from his fortified garrison, during a major festival, under his very nose, had made him a laughingstock among his own men, and a subject of concern for his superiors. There were whispers that a visiting bishop, dismayed by the tales of Vargas's heavy-handedness and the growing unrest in the Alpujarras, had lodged a formal complaint. The official story was that Vargas had been reassigned to duties more befitting his talents further north, away from the volatile Andalusian frontier. His replacement was an older, more cautious officer, less inclined to provocative brutality. The pressure on the mountain villages eased, subtly but perceptibly. Isabeau looked at the faces around her. Matteo, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a rare smile. Catalina, no longer just a fiery girl, but a young woman who had faced death and found her courage. She saw the children who now looked at her not with fear, but with awe and affection. The solitary path she had walked for so long had converged with theirs. She was no longer just Isabeau, the survivor. She was Isabeau, their protector. The future remained a tapestry woven with threads of uncertainty and danger. The great machine of the new kingdom would continue its inexorable grind. But here, in this small pocket of the vast Alpujarras, a different kind of strength had taken root. It was the strength of community, of shared hardship, of a hope rekindled. One crisp morning, as the sun painted the mountain peaks with gold, Isabeau watched Catalina practicing with a sling. The girl's form was improving, her aim becoming truer. Isabeau offered a rare nod of approval. "The mountains are harsh, Catalina," Isabeau said, her voice softer than it once was. "But they also provide. They teach.